Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's AISC student webinar, the 2021 Student Steel Bridge Competition, Compete from Campus Overview. Today is December 9th, 2020. My name is Christy Sattler, and I am the Senior Engineer for University Relations at AISC. We are glad that you are able to join us today as we provide an overview of this year's Compete from Campus option. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you for sticking things out and for being patient as we navigate SSBC events during this pandemic. We know it has been a challenging fall term, and we anticipate that the spring may be just as unusual. But I want you to know that it has been very important to our team that we give you the best and safest SSBC experience that we possibly can. Again, we really appreciate your patience, flexibility, and optimistic attitudes as we slowly but surely make decisions for the coming spring. Here is an overview of what we will cover today. We'll start with an update about all of the SSBC events for 2021. Then we'll dive into an overview of the Compete from Campus guidelines that were released last week. Next, we'll recap the resources that are available to help you and your team, followed by a summary of the important dates over the coming months. And then we will finish up with a question and answer session with whatever time is left. Again, my name is Christy Sattler, and I will be presenting today along with our special guest, Professor Jason McCormick. Jason is an associate professor at the University of Michigan, and he is also the chair of the SSBC Rules Committee. Of course, making SSBC happen is a team effort, and I will also note that our entire team is here on the call and behind the scenes today. Sadie Brown is AISC's special event planner. She is responsible for planning and facilitating the regional events, working closely with the host schools and SSBC teams. Sean Farron is AISC's education assistant, and he manages all SSBC participant and faculty inquiries, student club applications, fabricator partnership requests, and helps with regional event planning. Sean will be monitoring the chat feature to make sure your questions are answered. Maria Manukin is AISC's education program manager, and Christina Harbour is AISC's director of education. If interested, you can find a detailed breakdown of our roles on the Contact Us page of our website. I have a few announcements before we dive into everything. First, you'll notice that your microphone and camera are turned off. If you have any questions during the presentation, just write them in the chat box on the bottom of your screen. Please know that when you chat the group, it will be seen by everyone. So if you want to ask a question anonymously, you can message Sean Farron directly. You'll see his name in the chat feature dropdown. Similarly, if you are experiencing technical difficulties, you can message Sean and he'll do his best to help you. We will answer questions that come in through the chat at the end of the presentation. And if for some reason we can't get to all of the questions before our time is up, we will post a PDF of all Q&As to our website. And you can ask questions at any point during the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. We will post the recording to our website for your future reference. And finally, I want to emphasize that safety is our top priority, especially as we are still living in the middle of a global pandemic. We are all in this together, and the situation requires that each and every one of us take personal responsibility for the health, safety, and welfare of ourselves, our family, our colleagues, and peers. It's extremely important that we adhere to all university, local, state, regional, and federal health guidelines, even if that means disrupting our competition plans. Okay, so let's take a look at the SSBC events update. So many of you are likely already know this, but as of December 3rd, all of the in-person SSBC events for 2021 have been converted to a virtual format. This means that there will no longer be in-person regional events and no in-person national finals this coming spring. This was a difficult decision for AISC, but we did not think it was feasible at this point to hold safe and responsible in-person competitions during the pandemic. However, there are still two other options for your team to participate in 2021. You can still fabricate and build a bridge and then compete from your own campus. You will be asked to submit a video of your team's participation. We will be talking about this option in much more detail today. You can also participate in the supplemental competition, which is the design-only competition and is 100% virtual. Please note that your team has the option to participate in either or both of these formats. In conjunction with our announcement last week, we launched the SSBC Compete from Campus guidelines. This document outlines everything you need to know about competing from your campus, including the material and equipment that you will need, requirements for judges, details about the elements of the competition, like construction, loading, and weighing, and how things will be scored. Today, we will be going over this in much more detail. Before we dive into the Compete from Campus guidelines, I want to give you a roadmap of what the overall competition will look like this year. The format of the Compete from Campus will be similar to the traditional in-person events of previous years. Competition will first take place at a regional level, where your submissions are scored and compared to other teams within your own region. Then, a select number of teams from each region will qualify for a national finals level of competition, and those national finals will be virtual this year. We are still working out the exact details of what the national finals will look like, so please stay tuned for more information. You may also notice that there is no longer a combined virtual region that we discussed at the previous webinar. Since all of the in-person regional events have been canceled, this additional region was no longer needed. You will simply be competing against other teams in your region. All teams that pre-registered for the in-person or Compete from Campus option have been issued a $500 team stipend check by AISC. These checks are being mailed this week, so please contact us if you do not receive your check by January 15th. For those of you who indicated participation in the in-person regional events, we are still sending you your check. And the check is yours to keep, even if you are no longer able to participate in the Compete from Campus option due to university restrictions. The team stipend is only issued to teams fabricating a physical bridge. If you are only participating in the supplemental competition this year, your team will not be receiving a stipend. So just a quick reminder about the supplemental competition. So this is the 100% virtual option, where your team is challenged to submit a written engineering report and a video that summarizes the design of your bridge. The rules and clarifications for the supplemental competition are on our website, and they are located just below the SSBC rules. The submission deadline is March 1st, and I want to remind you that the winning team at the national level will receive an invite to the 2022 national finals. And if you missed it, I highly recommend viewing the October SSBC webinar that was presented by 3 practicing structural engineers and focused on writing strategies. You can find that recording at aisc.org/SSBC webinars. And I also want to let you know about one of the SSBC special awards, and that's the Team Engagement Award. This award is presented to a team that demonstrates an outstanding commitment to building a diverse team, creating an inclusive environment, and appreciating the value of remarkable individuals working together to succeed. All teams are eligible for this award, but participation is not mandatory, and it has no effect on your score or any facet of the competition. If you are interested in applying for this award, we ask you to submit a 1 to 2 page written narrative that details how your team benefited from your efforts toward equity and diversity through recruiting, training, and working together on your bridge. Entries are due on March 29th. And if you need some inspiration, I encourage you to check out the September issue of Modern Steel Construction for a story about last year's UCLA team. So at this point, I will turn things over to the chair of the SSBC Rules Committee, Jason McCormick. He will share an overview of the new Compete from Campus guidelines. And I would also like to remind our audience that you may submit questions at any point during this time, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. And with that, Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Christy, and hello, everyone. So as was mentioned, the next portion of the webinar will focus on an overview of the Compete from Campus guidelines. These guidelines are really meant to allow your team to compete with your physical bridge on your own campus in place of the canceled in-person regional events. Next slide, please. So safety really should be your #1 priority when planning and executing the Compete from Campus program. Safety with respect to the pandemic, keeping in mind whatever requirements are in place by your schools at that time. These may change over the next several months, so keep that in mind. And be sure to kind of follow up with your faculty advisor regularly to make sure that you're still meeting those requirements. And safety related to the competition itself. You are building a bridge, you are putting 2,500 pounds on that bridge. We want to make sure that that's all done safely and that the judges are safe and that the team members are safe. The materials are going to be an important consideration, particularly those associated with loading. So be sure to review all plans with your faculty advisor, head judge, and anybody else on campus that may be helpful in terms of looking at what you're planning on doing and making sure it's safe. Also, keep in mind that Section 5 of the rules, which allows judges to stop the competition for any safety concerns, is still valid during the Compete from Campus program. So remember also that you're going to need to work with your faculty advisor to ensure that you have permission from your school to conduct the necessary activities associated with this Compete from Campus program. If you think this is going to be an issue, you may want to consider now that supplemental competition that Christy mentioned. Next slide, please. So the Compete from Campus competition or program is meant to really mimic the conditions of an in-person regional event. And as such, we're requiring that all parts of the Compete from Campus competition for an individual team be completed on the same day. Those parts are construction, aesthetics, loading, both lateral and vertical, and weighing of the bridge. Now, some of the rules have been adjusted to ensure consistency across teams. Most of these changes in the rules deal with measuring deflections and concerns that not all schools have the same measurement equipment, and also concerns with safety in trying to measure the deflection of a fully loaded bridge. And we'll get into kind of those changes as we move through this presentation. Next slide, please. So as far as scoring, the competition categories will be aesthetics, construction speed, lightness, construction economy with some minor modifications, structural efficiency with some minor modifications, and then the overall performance rating, which will be a function of the construction costs and structural cost as it normally is. What is not going to be included in the Compete from Campus program are the stiffness categories, because we're not going to actually be physically measuring deflections, and the cost estimation category, because it just did not make sense based on some of the changes that needed to be made in order to make the Compete from Campus program work. Rankings overall will be based on overall performance rating, as they are typically done in an in-person regional event. Next slide, please. So here you can see the construction costs and structural cost equations. There's been some modifications to these equations in terms of the load test penalties and the aggregate deflection components of these equations have been removed from both the construction costs and structural costs. All other coefficients associated with these equations have not changed. So we've just removed the things because we're not actually going to physically be measuring deflections. Next slide, please. You're also going to have to keep in mind that you're going to need to obtain some judges to judge your Compete from Campus event. You'll need 1 to 3 judges. These could be professors, local engineers, steel fabricators, or others who have studied the rules. They don't necessarily have to be structural engineers. There will be a training session for all judges held by AISC, so that will bring most judges up to the speed that they need in order to be able to judge your event. Now, the judges should not be a member of your team, right, of your student steel bridge competition team. That makes sense because of the conflict of interest there. Also, as far as having a faculty advisor as a judge, that should only be done if all other options have been exhausted. Now, if you have more than one judge, you're going to have to choose which judge is appointed the head judge. That head judge will complete all of the official judging forms. They will also sign off on the honor code certification. Next slide, please. And as far as the honor code goes, the only way that we can make this Compete from Competition program really work is through your own honesty. So we need all of you to follow the rules and also observe all violations and record any violations that occurred during your event. So as such, we have an honor code that we're asking the team captain and head judge to sign that certifies that to the best of their knowledge that all rules were followed and all observed violations were recorded on the judging form. It's really up to you to make this competition work. We're putting it forward and we know that you can do it and that you will be honest in terms of the competing. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the overall materials and equipment that you're gonna need. Teams are responsible for providing all the equipment needed for the Compete from Campus program. So you will need to procure these materials in some way. So some of the materials that you're going to need are a camera and video recording equipment. This is because you're going to need to take pictures for aesthetics judging, and we're asking you to record video of the construction and load testing. You're going to need some tape for the site layout. You're going to need some measurement equipment for the pre and post construction inspection. You're going to need some loading material and equipment. And I'm going to come back to these and spend a little more time on the loading material and equipment because that's probably the most difficult to procure. And then you're also going to need some scales for weight measurement. Next slide, please. So as far as the loading material and equipment, we can start with the decking. So the decking's information in terms of the decking requirements are given in Rule 12.2. And you can see the overall dimensions of a single piece of decking should be 3 foot 6 inches by 3 feet. So this is to ensure that it will span between the two stringers and also to ensure that it can hold the required load safely. So the preferred decking and the decking that is typically used for the in-person events, whether it be the regional event or the national finals, is steel bar grating, given by the designation that you see there on the screen. Now, we do realize that everybody may not have steel bar grating available, so we've suggested some potential alternatives. So 1/4 inch steel plate will work. Also plywood, 2 layers of 3/4 inch thick plywood will work. Now, we also recognize, though, that the plywood doesn't weigh necessarily the same as the steel bar grating. Now, the steel bar grating is typically weighs right around 50 pounds. So we're saying that any decking that's lighter than 50 pounds is required to add additional load to bring the total load for the decking up to 50 pounds for the vertical load test. This ensures that everybody is loading the bridge with the same amount of weight. Next slide, please. So safety supports are also important. There's further information given about them in Rule 12.3. But what to keep in mind here in terms of the safety supports is they're not meant to catch your bridge if the bridge fails. They're meant to catch the load. So they're meant to essentially hold up the decking surface to prevent that load from tipping off and onto the floor or onto someone. So you need to be careful in terms of how you place these safety supports. Now, some options in regards to the safety supports are jack stands. These have been used in the regional events over the past couple of years and also during the national finals. You could also use nested stacks of plastic buckets, sandbags, or masonry units. Next slide, please. So here's just a picture of one of the options where they're using nested buckets. Note here that if you're using nested buckets, you're going to need more than just 2 stacks of buckets, one under each decking surface, right? You can see that there's 4 stacks of buckets for each of the decking surfaces. This is so that if the bridge does collapse, it evenly catches that decking surface so that it doesn't have a tendency to tip or tilt, right? We want to try to maintain the weight on the decking surface, even if the bridge collapses. Next slide, please. And then we can talk about load. This is probably the more difficult thing to procure. Information on the load itself is given in Rule 12.4. So as far as the lateral load, you're going to need 75 pounds of vertical preload. And that vertical preload is placed on the stringer opposite the one that's being pulled for the lateral load. You're also going to need the 50 pounds of lateral load that will be applied to the bridge. Now, this could be applied through a pulley system, as you see in the picture there, and as is done in the regional events and national finals. But an alternative to that would be to use a spring scale rather than the 50-pound load. So a spring scale or a fish scale that can be pulled to show 50 pounds, and then the judge can observe whether the lateral load test was passed. Next slide, please. The next is the vertical load. You can see the vertical load that's typically been used is steel angles. These are typically 4 by 4 by 3/8 or 5 by 5 by 5/16 inch, cut so that they're about approximately 25 pounds apiece. If steel angles are not available, sacks of different material could be used, containers of liquid, concrete blocks, or a jacking system. If you're to use a jacking system, please refer to Rule 12.4 because there's some added information there in regards to where the load should be applied on the decking surface itself. The other thing to keep in mind in terms of choosing the materials to use for your vertical load, you want to choose something that will fit stably on top of that decking surface when fully loaded. So keep that in mind as well. So it may be something that you have to consider or have some trial and error with before the actual competition day. Next slide, please. And as I said, the load might be difficult to procure, so schools can request assistance from local AISC member fabricators through a local fabricator partnership. Next slide, please. All right, now I want to speak specifically about the parts of the Compete from Campus program. So we'll start with construction. As far as construction, there's no change actually from an in-person competition. You're still going to have pre-construction inspection of members, tools, in the staging yards based on Section 8 of the rules. There's still going to be violations imposed based on accidents and also stoppages based on safety concerns during construction based on Section 10 of the rules. And then there's going to be post-construction inspection to make sure dimensional requirements associated with the overall bridge are followed and that connections are meeting the rules specified in Section 9. What we are asking is that you record construction, and you're going to record construction from the start of construction all the way through the completion of inspection. And we would like you to do this with a wide frame video so that you capture essentially the whole construction site if possible. Next slide, please. Now, as far as the site plan, the only change that's been made from the rules to the Compete from Campus rules is with the transportation zone. We fixed the transportation zone at 10 feet. This way that all teams are competing on the same playing field. They're using the same transportation zone so that we can compare scores across different teams. So that's been set at 10 feet, which means that you need at least 15 feet wide by 49 foot long area in order to hold the construction competition. Now, a taping plan in terms of laying out the site plan will be provided in the future. Next slide, please. And you can see here just the overall site plan. Just keep in mind that you're going to have to tape out this whole site plan. Keep in mind that the staging yard on the left side is slightly different than the staging yard on the right side. You're also going to have to tape out the river, the footings, and all the boundaries for the construction zone. Next slide, please. As far as your construction equipment needs, you're going to need a magnet in order to be able to check whether your members are steel or not, so the judges can check that. If you have a box, you're going to use that box for checking member dimensions. If you do not have a box available to you, we will come up with some guidelines on how the judges can check your members for the box dimensions later on in the future. You'll also need a timer, so you'll need 1 or 2 stopwatches or phone stopwatches. You should really have more than one person taking time so that an accurate time measurement is provided. You'll need a 3-foot level to make sure that some of the rules are followed, and a passageway template, which is typically made out of plywood, but you could use a stiff cardboard in this situation, should work out fine. You'll need some measuring tapes as well in order to kind of measure dimensions. Next slide, please. All right, once construction judging is finished, that's when you should move to the aesthetics portion of the Compete from Campus program. Remember, aesthetics is based on the bridge's appearance and the bridge's poster. So guidelines in regards to the requirements for the bridge appearance is given in Rule 6.2.1.1. And the way that's going to be judged is based on submitted photos. So you're going to take these photos immediately after construction judging. You're going to take photos of the north, south, east, and west elevation. So 4 separate photos there. You're going to take a photo overhead, and no, you don't have to do your best Spider-Man impression by hanging from the ceiling. You can just stand on a chair, get an angle from up above. You don't have to go too crazy in terms of that. And also provide a photo of each unique type of connection on your bridge. As far as the poster goes, the specifications and requirements there are given in Rule 6.2.1.2. The only difference is rather than printing out the poster, you're just going to submit the PDF file of your poster to AISC. Next slide, please. Now, because we want to make sure that judging is fair across the whole region and that there's consistency in terms of that judging, aesthetics judging will actually be done after all teams have submitted their competition packages from a given region. So that this way, the same set of judges can be used to evaluate all bridges in that region. So the judges will review the pictures, review the poster file, and make their judgments based on where the aesthetics rankings are. Now the panel of regional judges will be selected by AISC. Next slide, please. And then that moves us on to the next portion of the competition, the loading portion. Probably the most difficult and most complex in terms of what needs to take place with the Compete from Campus competition. Now, as far as loading, keep in mind that it can be conducted in a different location than construction. We understand that maybe the location where the construction is being conducted is not necessarily a good location in order to conduct the load testing. But what you need to keep in mind is that you shouldn't be applying any forces to the bridge except those that are needed to move it in between the time that you complete construction, do the aesthetics, photographs, and prepare for loading. So what I mean here is no one should be sitting on the bridge, no one should be pushing on the bridge, no one should be doing anything to the bridge or even touching the bridge except to pick it up at its corners and move it to the location that's necessary. Now the lateral and vertical load tests are going to be a pass-fail event. Like I said, we're not going to explicitly measure deflections as part of the Compete from Campus competition. So this is just going to be a pass-fail event. Passing is required in order to be considered for awards beyond aesthetics and also required in order to gain an invitation to compete in the national finals. We are asking you also to record a video that clearly shows the vertical and lateral load tests. And I can't emphasize enough that safety is paramount in terms of doing the loading, both the lateral load test and the vertical load test. So make sure you consult with your faculty advisor, consult with a head judge, make sure things are planned out before the day that you actually plan on competing. Next slide, please. So in preparation though for the loading, you should make sure that you have a relatively flat surface and that the dimensions where you're doing the load testing are large enough for the bridge and large enough to space to have the load that's going to be placed on the bridge. And also you want enough space that someone can move away from the bridge for a collapse to occur. Consider protective material for the floor. If you were to drop an angle iron or if the bridge was to collapse, there is potential for damage to the floor. We don't want to damage property. So you may want to consider using plywood under the bridge where you're doing the loading. If you are loading on a surface that's not completely rigid and somewhat malleable, like a carpet or something like that, you may want to consider using rigid plates under each of the piers. This will make sure that the bridge doesn't sink into the floor, which would count against your deflection. Right? These rigid plates should all be of the same thickness. Also, any team member that's participating in loading must wear the required safety equipment. So as you can see in the picture there, hard hat, protective eyewear, work gloves, and construction boots. Also remember the proper safety equipment should be worn during construction as well. Next slide, please. So for the lateral load test, you can use any system that will apply a 50-pound horizontal load to the stringers. This could be a pulley system that allows the load to hang vertically, as you saw in the previous photograph, or a spring scale or fish scale attached to the top stringer that can be pulled to show 50 pounds clearly. Now, the way that you're going to measure whether you pass the lateral load test or not is you can use a plumb bob that will be centered in the middle of a 1-inch radius circle at the start before loading, before the horizontal load is actually applied. Then when the horizontal load is applied, if that plumb bob goes outside of the circle, and we're not talking about swaying outside of the circle, we kind of the rest position of the plumb bob. If it goes outside of that 1-inch radius circle, then your bridge is deemed to have failed. If it doesn't, the bridge is deemed to have passed. The procedure for the lateral load test is really outlined in section 11.4 of the rules. Keep in mind, you will use one piece of grading or decking and a 75-pound vertical load that's applied above the stringer opposite to the one where the lateral load is being applied. Also, teams should provide their own lateral restraint devices as you would do in an in-person event. Next slide, please. For the vertical load test, the loading material should fit in a stable manner on the bridge decking, right? This is important. You don't want load slipping off while you're trying to add further load. Also, the safety supports, as I mentioned earlier, need to be positioned so that the load won't drop more than approximately 4 inches. Remember, you're trying to support the decking surface, not the bridge itself. We don't want that load to tip and fall. Your bridge passes if it does not deflect more than 3 inches at location D1 and D2, or it does not collapse during loading or unloading. The bridge also will be deemed to fail and loading should be stopped immediately if the bridge touches the safety supports or floor, if a member, weld, or bolt ruptures, if there's slip observed in interlocking connections, if a member buckles, or the bridge undergoes excessive side sway. Keep in mind though, side sway is not explicitly going to be measured during the vertical load test. Also, the judges have the right to stop loading anytime if they think collapse is imminent. Next slide, please. So one change that has been made in terms of the vertical load is that all bridges will compete with a die roll of n equals 2. So we've fixed the die roll for the compete from campus competition. So that means the left side deck will be 10 feet from the east end of the bridge, and the right side deck will be 4 feet from the east side of the bridge. And that will also dictate the location of D1 and D2. The left decking will take the 1,500 pounds. The right decking will take the 1,000 pounds. Next slide, please. So as far as the vertical load test procedure, the bridge deck should be placed on the bridge with any of the additional weight that's needed in order to bring the total load associated with the deck to 50 pounds. Then you're going to add the 100 pounds of preload to each of the bridge decks. After that, you need to set up some sort of means of indicating whether the bridge has deflected 3 inches at position D1 and D2. So some suggestions here would be potentially using a sturdy block whose surface is 3 inches below, say, the deck, or below a stringer at location D1 and D2, so that as the bridge deflects, if it hits that, then you know the bridge is deflected 3 inches. Another option would be just a horizontal ribbon placed 3 inches below the stringer spanning perpendicular to the length of the bridge at location D1 and D2 as well. Again, here, if the bridge were to deflect and touch that ribbon, you know automatically that you failed the load test. By doing it in this way, no one has to be next to the bridge trying to measure anything while it's fully loaded. Provides a more safe approach to things. Now, once you get that set up, you're going to add the 1,400 pounds to the west end decking, so the left side decking from the photo before, and then 900 pounds added to the east end decking, the right side decking from the photo on the previous page. At that point, you're going to verify, the judge will verify that the deflection is less than 3 inches. If it's less than 3 inches, you've passed thus far. And then you need to unload the bridge carefully and safely. And provided that the bridge doesn't collapse during unloading, then the bridge will be deemed as passing. Next slide, please. So then the last part of the competition is weighing the bridge. Next slide, please. So the bridge should be weighed immediately after the load test. The most convenient way to weigh the bridge will be with 4 scales. So you place a scale under each of the piers and then sum up the total load shown on the 4 scales. If you do not have 4 scales available to you, then as you take the bridge apart, you can sum the weight of each individual parts. The thing to keep in mind here is also you will have to weigh any nuts and bolts that are part of the constructed bridge as well. And the judge should verify all measured weights. Now, even if your bridge were to fail one of the load tests, the lateral or the vertical load tests, all bridges should be weighed. We'd like to see the results in regards to this. Next slide, please. So that gives you kind of a lot of information in regards to the each of the competition categories. The last thing to really discuss is the submissions. So what you're going to need to submit to AISC needs to include the videos. So the construction, lateral load test, and vertical load test. The way that you're going to submit these videos is you can either post them on YouTube or some other site that has a URL that you can provide to AISC so that they can access these videos at any time. You'll also have to submit the judging forms as a PDF scan, so they'll have what the judges write down in terms of the construction, loading, and weight portions of the competition. You're going to have to provide a PDF scan of the certification statement signed by the head judge and team captain. So that honor code statement, And we're also asking that you provide the name and contact information for the judges in case there's any appeals issues there. You may also have to input information from the judges' forms into an Excel spreadsheet, but we're still working out whether that's going to be a requirement. And if that is, you'll have to submit that spreadsheet as well. For the aesthetics, you're going to have to submit the poster as a PDF file and the bridge photographs as JPEG and PNG files. So a separate photograph for the north, south, east, and west elevations, the overhead photo, and the photo of each individual connection type. Next slide. So that gives you a lot of information in terms of the guidelines associated with the Compete from Campus program. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Christy, who's going to talk about some of the resources that are available to you and some important dates to keep in mind.
All right, thanks, Jason. So first we'll talk about some additional resources that are available for your team. First, if you have any questions about the setup for the Compete from Campus option, we encourage you to reach out to the SSBC National Head Judge, John Perucchi. So his email address is right here on the slide, and please do not hesitate to ask him questions as you prepare to compete on your own campus. We also plan to publish a list of the frequently asked questions on our website. And then if you have specific questions about the official rules, please check out the clarifications page on the SSBC site. You may find the answer there, but if you don't, you can also submit your own question to the Rules Committee. They will review your question and develop an answer. Then your question and answer will be posted up on the website for all of the other teams to see. We've also summarized what you need for the Compete from Campus into a handy one-page checklist. So you can check out aisc.org/SSBC Compete from Campus to download that list and to also see the other resources. And then we do ask you to go ahead and start looking for a Compete from Campus head judge so that you can have someone confirmed by February 1st. If we start to approach January 15th and you are struggling to find a head judge, you can request help from AISC by emailing Sean Farron. We will post your request on our website along with your team captain's contact information. And then we'll notify local AISC members to then contact the team captain directly if they're available. And the main reason we're asking you to confirm your campus judges by February 1st is so that they can attend the online training session. This will be a virtual training session hosted by AISC, and the webinar will take place on February 10th at 2:00 p.m. Central. We will also post the recording on our website for those judges who are unable to attend the live event. We have several other resources that are available on our aisc.org/SSBC website. You can check out our October webinar where we walk through each resource in detail. So for example, we created a working remotely as a team guide for students to ease the transition to virtual teamwork. So even if you are already familiar with virtual classes, we hope the tools in this guide will not only serve you well during the pandemic, but also helpfully help you out as you transition into your professional careers. Another resource is our new NCSCA partnership. So we've partnered with the National Council of Structural Engineers Associations, or NCSCA, to pair practicing engineers with student teams to provide mentorship and guidance as teams develop the design of their bridges. You can learn more about that partnership and how to get in contact with an engineer in your local area by visiting the SSBC website. And then we do ask for your faculty advisor to complete a pre-registration update form by February 1st. So this form will be available starting in mid-December. And the form will be used to confirm participation plans and for you to provide additional information that will help us prepare for the virtual events. Teams participating in the SSBC Compete from Campus will also be asked to provide the contact information for their campus judges. And so we do recognize that plans may have changed already, or they could change over the next month or so. So maybe you already know that the Compete from Campus is going to be difficult to pull off with your campus restrictions and you would like to switch to the supplemental competition, but maybe you didn't originally pre-register for that. Or perhaps you're thinking about doing the Compete from Campus option now that you know more about it, but you hadn't pre-registered for that one. If any of those are the cases, please simply reach out to us as soon as possible and we can discuss your situation and your options for making adjustments to your pre-registration. So here's a recap of the important dates that we discussed today. So February 1st is that big deadline where we ask your faculty advisor to complete the pre-registration update form, and that's also the deadline for you to confirm your Compete from Campus judges. Then on February 10th, AISC will host a webinar to train the Compete from Campus judges. And then March 1st is the supplemental competition submission deadline. March 29th is the deadline to submit applications for the Team Engagement Award. And then April 1st is the submission deadline for the Compete from Campus. And we do encourage you that if you do your competition well in advance of that date, to go ahead and submit all of your materials as soon as you can, and that'll help us out on our end. But April 1st is the last day to submit. And you can download a list of all these important updates or important dates from our website. It's a one-page summary of everything that we've talked about. So that's at aisc.org/SSBC important dates. So with that, that brings us to the end of the formal presentation, and we'll open it up for questions. So I encourage you, if you have not already, to chat your questions into the chat box, and then we will answer those that we can with the time we have left. So Sean, do we have any questions from our audience?
Yes, thanks, Christy. So our first question is, will a list of schools that are competing in each region be published anywhere?
Yes, it will be. So you can check out the regional events section of aisc.org/SSBC, hopefully later this month, but that's where we will be publishing that list.
When will we know the dates of the regional and national competitions?
Okay, good question. So for the Compete from Campus program, there are actually no set regional event dates or a national finals date. So all teams just need to simply complete their competition submission by April 1st. And again, we encourage you to submit earlier if you can, but April 1st is that deadline. And then we are currently planning to have a joint award ceremony for all regions. It'll be a virtual award ceremony that will take place during the week of April 12th. So as we have more details about that, we will release it for everybody to learn more.
Great. The next question is, will teams have an opportunity to watch each other's video submissions?
So we're planning in the case for the national finals that yes, there will be an opportunity there. For the regional events, we're still working out the details of what that would look like as far as sharing the video submissions, but it would probably be after everything has been submitted. So again, just stay tuned as we kind of work out these additional details.
Okay, the next question is more related to the rules. Will the number of judges we choose between the 1 and 3 requirement affect our score?
So to answer that, no, it will not affect your score in any way. One judge is essentially the minimum requirement, but it really would be helpful if you have 2 to 3 judges just to keep track of things during the construction process, and also to have an extra set of eyes in terms of the load testing and that. But it doesn't affect the score in any way.
Awesome. Thanks for submitting questions, everybody. You can keep sending them in. Okay. If a team is participating in both the Compete from Campus and supplemental competition formats, do you recommend and/or require that the team use the same bridge design for both competitions, or do teams have the freedom to explore an entirely different design for the 2 formats?
So I am not going to make a recommendation because I think that's every team's choice, but teams do have the freedom to use the same design or use separate designs. There's no necessarily connection between the 2 events. So it's completely up to you and your team whether you use the same one or use a separate one.
Okay. For the supplemental competition, how should we gauge the weight of the bridge?
Again, that's part of the competition, is to figure out how you would gauge how much your bridge might weigh, right? Steel has a density associated with it, so there's potential ways to go about it that way. But that's really something that that you need to figure out as a team, how you want to estimate that weight cost.
How does removing the deflection criteria affect scoring?
So as you saw on the slides, it's going to affect the construction cost and the structural cost equations. The construction cost equation had in it a load test penalty associated with deflection. So that penalty is going to be removed from the construction cost equation. As far as the structural costs, there was an aggregate deflection component in that equation that's been removed and the load test penalty component that's been removed. So then the structural cost side of things is essentially completely focused on the weight of the bridge.
Great. The next question is, does the on-campus program have to actually be on campus? Our university has said that it would be approved to compete at a local venue, but it could be much more difficult to actually do it on campus instead of another venue.
Christy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I would say, if you have permission from your university officials or your faculty advisor to participate and gather off campus, then that's fine. We don't require that the event has to happen on your campus, but we just do encourage you to make sure that you have the approval, from the appropriate people, and that you're following all the university and the local guidelines.
Thanks. How many teams from each region will go to the finals?
So that will be based on the same way we would base it if we had in-person regional events. So based on section 4.4.2 in the rules. So it's based on the number of teams that are actually competing in your region, and then a certain number then qualifies to move on to the finals. So if you look at 4.4.2 and then look at the number of competing in the Compete from Campus program for your given region, that'll give you the number that would be invited.
Okay, I think this is another Christy question. If two schools are competing near each other, are they able to compete at the same location to more easily acquire loading and or judges resources?
It may or may not be recommended. It depends on kind of your local situation and your respective university requirements, and the restrictions that are in place. Obviously with the pandemic situation and trying to limit interactions and things like that, we don't recommend it, but you would have to check with your local university and your faculty advisor.
Great. Okay, how will the national finals differ from the regionals, or are we essentially competing with everybody using the same competition, the same compete from campus submission? I can repeat that if it came out weird. It's essentially asking, like, are we using the same submission that we're using for a regional submission for the national competition?
We don't necessarily have an answer to that just yet. So the details for the national finals are being finalized. So I just encourage everyone to stay tuned. Just with canceling all the in-person last week, we still have some additional things to figure out for the spring. So the answer is right now we don't know exactly what that will look like, but stay tuned.
Okay. All right, so this question, the way it's worded, I'm not sure if it'll come out exactly right, but is the vertical deflection 3 in aggregate or at any point in the bridge? I had assumed aggregate, but it was mentioned that having a ribbon 3 under your bridge would be appropriate for measuring deflection.
So the way we're going to do the Compete from Campus program is it's going to be 3 inches at location D1 or D2, provided that your bridge does not deflect more than 3 inches at either of those locations. It's going to be deemed as passing. Again, we don't want to measure, we don't want anybody having to measure the fully weighted bridge, and we also can't ensure the consistency of the measurement devices of different teams. So we've decided to go with it this way, provided that you don't see a 3-inch deflection at location D1 or D2 during the vertical loading, then you will be deemed as passing.
For the national finals, will deflection be pass-fail as well?
I think that's, as Christy mentioned, still up in the air in terms of what exactly the national finals will look like, and if there will be any changes from what's done for the regional event versus the national finals. So like Christy said, make sure you kind of keep a lookout for that, and you'll hear some information shortly.
Okay. The last two questions we have are things that were answered in the slides, but we'll ask them just to review. How will aesthetics be judged when competing from campus?
So aesthetics will be judged based on the photographs that you take after construction judging. So you'll take a photograph of the north, south, east, and west elevations, an overhead photo, and a photo of each individual unique connection. Those photos will be used to kind of judge the bridge's appearance based on what's given in the rules in section 6 of the rules. And then the poster will also be judged. We assume the PDF file would be the same file that you would have printed out for a physical poster where you in a in-person regional event. And that will be judged based on its content and based on the content that's required as given in section 6 of the rules as well. And then this will be done by a panel of judges after all the submissions come in from a given region, so that a single panel of judges can judge all the aesthetics for all the bridges for that region. And that set of judges will rank those bridges based on, again, the bridge's appearance and the poster.
Okay, this is the last question I have, another review question. Will the die roll be the same for both the regional and national competitions?
Again, that is still undecided whether that will be the case. Again, the national finals, what that's going to specifically look like in terms of the compete from campus is still being decided, whether the die roll will change or if anything else will be changed. So again, just kind of keep an eye out for when that information comes out.
Okay, well, that's all I have. We got a question here that's basically just like when we think the rules for the national finals will be finalized. That was the last question I had.
We don't necessarily have a date at this point, but hopefully over the coming month or so. So again, stay tuned, pay attention to the SSBC update emails. And then obviously we post everything on our website. So that's kind of the best way to keep up to date with everything that we've announced.
Okay, I think, yeah, that's all the questions I had collected.
All right, excellent. Well, great questions, everyone. So just before we go, just a couple of things just to recap. First, we're going to drop a link into the chat for a post-event survey. So we greatly appreciate your feedback on these webinars. We try to make these as informative and helpful to you as possible. And so we'd like to hear how these are going, and if you have any ideas for future webinars, we definitely welcome that feedback. So Sean, just drop that into the chat, so go ahead and click on that before you leave the Zoom meeting, and just give us your feedback. I encourage you to download the important dates document that summarizes everything that we talked about in terms of deadlines for completing that pre-registration update form and for submitting your Compete from Campus submissions for consideration, and the application for the Team Engagement Award. All of that is summarized on that one-page document. And then as a reminder, that pre-registration update form will be due February 1st, and that will need to be completed by your faculty advisor. And we will make that available in probably the middle of December at aisc.org/pre-reg-update. So stay tuned for that. And then we encourage you to follow us on social media. So we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all of those channels. And we have a special hashtag specifically for SteelBridge. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I want to also give a very special thank you to Jason McCormick, the chair of the SSBC Rules Committee. We really appreciate you being here and answering questions and giving us such a great overview of the Compete from Campus guidelines. So that is all that we have today. So again, thank you for attending, and be safe, everyone.